The Royal Institution of Great Britain had hosted countless distinguished speakers over its 200-year history, but few had generated as much anticipation as David Cameron's lecture on leadership and public service in the modern age. It was a chilly November evening in 2024, and the Grand Amphitheatre was filled with political students, academics, and journalists eager to hear from the man who had led Britain through coalition government, won an outright majority, and then spectacularly resigned after the Brexit referendum. Cameron stood at the lectern, perfectly groomed in his Savile Row suit, the picture of establishment confidence. His speech had been flowing smoothly for 20 minutes, filled with anecdotes about decision-making in Downing Street and reflections on the nature of political leadership. Public service, he said with characteristic earnestness, is about putting country before self. It's about making decisions not for personal gain, but for the greater good of the nation you serve. The audience listened attentively as he continued. When I entered number 10 in 2010, I was determined that my government would be remembered for integrity, for transparency, and for placing the national interest above everything else. A few journalists exchanged knowing glances. Cameron's post-political career had been controversial, particularly his work for Greensill Capital, but tonight he seemed determined to reshape his legacy. The true test of a public servant, Cameron declared, is what they do after they leave office. Do they continue to serve? Do they maintain the standards they set in government? Or do they simply cash in on their connections? It was at that moment that a woman in the third row stood up. She was perhaps 40 years old, smartly dressed in a charcoal suit, with an air of quiet authority. "Mr. Cameron," her voice carried clearly through the amphitheatre, "may I ask you a question?" Cameron smiled indulgently. "Of course, though I believe we're saving questions for the end." "This can't wait," she interrupted firmly. "My name is Rachel Morrison. I was your special advisor at number 10 from 2012 to 2016. I worked in your private office handling sensitive government business." Cameron's smile faltered slightly. He clearly didn't recognize her immediately, which wasn't surprising given the dozens of advisors who had cycled through Downing Street during his tenure. "Ms. Morrison, yes, of course. If you'd like to wait until—" "You just told this audience that the true test of a public servant is what they do after leaving office," Rachel said, her voice steady, but with an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "You said the test is whether they cash in on their connections." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I have documents here that show exactly what you did after leaving office, Mr. Cameron, and I think this audience deserves to hear the truth about how you turned your time as Prime Minister into a multi-million-pound business opportunity, starting long before you even left Downing Street." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Cameron gripped the lectern, his composure visibly cracking. "I'm not sure what you think you have, but—" "I have 4 years' worth of diary entries, meeting records and correspondence," Rachel interrupted, "that show how you systematically positioned yourself for private enrichment while still serving as Prime Minister, and I'm going to share them all right now because the British public deserves to know the truth about your so-called public service." The audience erupted in murmurs. Cameras that had been filming the lecture swiveled towards Rachel. This prestigious evening had just become something else entirely. Cameron's face had gone pale, but he attempted to maintain control. "Ms. Morrison, I don't know what grievance you're harbouring, but making wild accusations—" "They're not wild accusations," Rachel cut him off sharply. "Let me start with something simple. Do you remember March 2015, 14 months before you resigned?" She opened her folder with deliberate precision. "You held a private breakfast meeting at Chequers with Lex Greensill. This was before most people had even heard of Greensill Capital. The meeting wasn't in your official diary. I know because I was the one who arranged it off the books." Cameron's jaw tightened. "Business leaders often meet with prime ministers." "This wasn't a policy discussion," Rachel interrupted. "I was there, Mr. Cameron. I took notes. Greensill pitched you on becoming an advisor to his company after you left office. You discussed compensation, £60,000 per year plus share options. This was March 2015, over a year before the Brexit referendum, which means you were already planning your exit strategy." She held up a document. "Here are my contemporaneous notes from that meeting." Greensill said, and I quote, "Once you're out of number 10, David, There's serious money to be made. My company will go public, and your shares could be worth 8 figures. The audience gasped. Several journalists were frantically typing.